Hey everyone. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day so far. We've got some awesome content to cover with you guys today, and I've also got some amazing guests joining me. As everyone trickles in, why doesn't everyone just put into the chat where you're coming in from, where you're tuning in from? We'd love to hear from you. So today we've got, like I said, awesome content that we're going to be covering, and today is all about objection handling and how to get you closer to closing that deal. So with that being said, I want to hear from everyone that's attending. What is the most common objection you have experienced this quarter so far? You should see a poll coming through here. Yep, it's on the screen right now. So no budget, no interest, not the right person. We already have something in place. Timing, send me an email, the classic, or other. Let us know what is the most common objection you're getting. It looks like we already have something in place, is slowly taking the lead there. While the results come in, why don't we kick it off and start getting to know our guests a little bit? So I'm going to start off with Dave. Dave, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everyone who you are, what you're all about. We'd love to hear from you.
Everyone, Dave Frechette. I'm talking to you from Colorado, just outside of Boulder. Let's see, I've been 34 years in high-tech B2B enterprise software. I started off as a BDR, though we didn't really call ourselves that back then. 17 years as an enterprise sales rep, a 3-time CRO. I'm a current advisor to LeadIQ and a former customer of LeadIQ at my last company, PlanView. So super excited to be here and share my knowledge with you. I'll also say that I built 5 sales enablement organizations, and coaching and teaching sales is a passion of mine.
Awesome, Dave. We're very lucky to have you on here today, and I look forward to hearing you plug LeadIQ all the time throughout this webinar, so thank you so much. Cameron, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's a pleasure to see so many awesome cities on here in different countries. It's really exciting. My name is Cameron Emery. I'm based in Denver. I'm originally from New Orleans, but lived in Denver for 6 years. And professionally, I've been at Salesforce just over 4 years. I started as an SDR, then moved up to BDR. So did inbound, outbound sales, qualifications, leads, pretty much everything with that. And then I've been an account executive on the healthcare and life sciences team, working with small businesses for just over 2 years now. So that's really my story. Excited to be here and share some good knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you, Cam. I know you have a wealth of knowledge to share with our attendees, so we're excited to have you. And last but certainly not least, Colby, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, my name is Colby Offinger. I'm calling in from the great state of Maine right now. I help support the BDR function in EMEA and enterprises with a little bit of commercial sprinkled in on there. Thanks to drinking our own champagne here at MindTickle, I get a lot of time off too. So I enjoy hiking, biking, kayaking, snowboarding. If you guys enjoy those things too, I would love to entertain a conversation via LinkedIn. So feel free to shoot me a message or email me.
Awesome. Thank you, Colby, for joining us here today. And I know for sure that your reps are always overcoming objections. So we're super eager to hear your insight and see what your reps are doing with some of these objections that are coming up on a daily basis. We also are going to share a few resources in the upper right-hand corner here. Really awesome resources for objection handling that we've collected from our guests, as well as some of our internal resources here at LeadIQ we would like to share. So you should see my most recent blog post here at LeadIQ around some of these common sales objections and some frameworks on how to overcome them. Also, you should see a resource from MindTickle around the objection handling virtual classrooms. Please check those out. Lastly, LeadIQ is actually pushing out a state of prospecting survey. We would love to get your insights. So anyone, if you're open to sharing what's been happening and what's happening in prospecting here today, we'd love to hear from you. We're going to culminate this report and publish it this year, and you'll all gain early access to the report and have a chance for your insights to be featured if you'd like to share some of those insights. Let's jump into the content here and start talking about objections. So I want to open it up with a quick poll. When facing an objection, it's better to ask probing questions than provide an immediate answer. So we'd love to hear what you guys feel, agree or disagree. And I want to get the take of our guests here to see how they're feeling about this hot take. So Colby, why don't you share your insights on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're all calling into a really tough market. It's very competitive for most folks on this call right now. And the BDR organization over here at Mindtickle is really in charge of the first. So we are getting a lot of those initial objections right in our face all day, every day. But when you really look at the objections that we get, you can almost break it down into 10 common objections, no matter what industry you're in, that you're going to get. So if you can master those first 10 objections, think of your brush offs. I was expecting somebody else. I'm not the right person. I'm running into a meeting. If you could really master those very basic 10 objections, you're almost guaranteed to get that first 30 and 45 seconds to then get another minute, right? So the first 30, 45 seconds of any call, you're going to always get, hey, I'm busy right now. I'm X, Y, and Z. And if we can acknowledge those, level with them, and then ask a quick question right off the back of that, I would say you're winning a good portion of the next minute and a half to really provide that value statement.
Love that. I love that. Yeah. At the end of the day, oftentimes when you get that first no, it is really a brush off. So you've got to understand what the true objection is. So I love that framework, Colby. Thank you for sharing it. So what I want to jump into now is, in your opinion, Cam, what is the true purpose of objection handling?
Yeah, Colby had a really lot of great points there. And for me, throughout my experience, I like to think of objections as that's where the selling really starts. So I think it's usually can be a red flag if someone's totally agreeable and just says yes to everything. They might be trying to get you off the phone or just like not being totally honest with you. So I think if you take anything away from today, one of the themes should really be objections could be a really good thing because it shows like if they're willing to ask you questions back or kind of show reasons why like they might not be entertaining your call at first, you have to dig in why. I think that's where the rapport building starts, getting to know who they are, like what's important to them, rather than just trying to make assumptions and just think that they were excited to talk to you. The way I look at it as objections is really when the selling starts, but at the same time, it's that first opportunity for you to build that relationship with that person, and that leads to a longer sales cycle and more success overall.
Definitely, Cam. And that's something that I experienced when I first started off in tech sales as a BDR is those happy ears. You just get those happy ears and you're like, oh, they're telling me everything I want to hear. It's going great. But usually when that happens, they're probably not being fully honest with you, like Cam's saying. So you really got to suss out what's truly happening within that objection, because usually it's not the true objection and we really need to get it out. So Dave, I'd love to get your opinion on this. Because of course, objection handling is different from a seller's perspective than a BDR's perspective. So in terms of objections throughout a sales cycle, what do you feel like is the true purpose of overcoming those objections throughout a deal cycle?
Yeah. The deal cycle is really made up of three huge milestones, right? The first one is it pipeline, right? Is it an SQL? And you're working on qualifying that. So whether you're doing outbound or you have an inbound lead, you're going to run into objections, right? And they're going to be slightly different. But the thing I'll tell you this, if you have a point of view, you've done your research and really understand who they are, the persona, the value drivers that your solution brings, you should be well prepared to be able to not just answer the questions, but dig deeper and be more curious about where that route is coming from. So make sure that on the pipeline stuff, that if you're a BDR, if you're an AE doing cold, you have to really make sure that you're dealing with the right ICP, the ideal customer profile, and you're dealing with the persona, and you understand what value drivers of your solution lines up to their job to be done, right? What's their day in the life? Then you're gonna be better prepared to have a really good conversation. In sales, though, look, the second milestone is how do you get the solution fit, right? This is where you're doing your discovery and you're understanding the requirements and what they want to do. And the framework I like to use is a value framework, which is really designed in a way that will have a conversation of discovery and it'll tease out objections along the way. And some of those objections could be competitive traps that maybe a third-party vendor set against you. So asking questions about why it's important to them, how will that impact them or the team. The biggest thing that you got to be fearful of is, if it's a competitive trap, is it a gap in your capabilities of your solution? Because that's what's happening. They're trying to quantify and qualify, right? They're trying to qualify you if your solution is going to meet their minimum requirements. And so if you think about it through that context, that's really important. The third one is, after solution fit, is a vendor of choice, right? This is where you're probably running into things like pricing objections and the stuff that just, hey, look, you've been down selected as a vendor with 3 other vendors, right? Now this is like where you got to fight to win, right? You're at the 20-yard line to punch it in for a touchdown. It's so important that you don't lose track of that framework of asking questions why it's important. You deliver your price and they come back and say, well, this is really expensive. Like, this is too expensive. We can't afford this. Budget's not there. Ask your question, well, compared to what, right? Compared to what you're already doing today, we need to build a business case then to justify this for the economic buyer. Wouldn't you agree? Or, no, your vendor is 20% less than you. The competitive vendor is 20% less than you. If they're truthful and honest, then you know that you got to sharpen your pencil, or you have to sell on more value, right? But the point being is, objections are buying signals, and what Cameron said, right? It's really where sales begins. I truly believe that they're buying signals and intent. When you're in that kind of stage where you're at the trying to get solution fit and prove that your solution meets their requirements, but then also for a choice where they want to award you the business.
Definitely. Great insight. Thank you so much, Dave. Colby, I'd like to hear from you. Since you lead a team of BDRs in multiple different sectors and segments and everything like that, where do you see your reps when they're initially starting off? Where do you see them struggling in terms of objection handling? Like, what is the most difficult part of objection handling at the beginning of your career as an SDR?
Feeling comfortable doing it. I think that is a big hurdle for anybody new getting on the phone, feeling comfortable with overcoming the objection, right? So we could, and Dave, Cameron, I'm sure you guys have lists of scripts and objection handlings and stuff. We could provide that for anybody, but we really have to create an environment where they feel comfortable with making mistakes first and feel comfortable with growing, right? And only through that kind of growing environment are you going to get better. So we like to set up a lot of role plays. We like to spread tribal knowledge. That's something we do with our own system with our Call AI. So anybody new coming into the business, they're probably listening to hundreds of calls before they even hit the phone, right? Because they want to hear what good sounds like, what improvement sounds like. And we're all to blame here. Sometimes we mess up a call. And those are our biggest learning lessons in there. We could provide a lot of content for folks, but I think that the biggest point for somebody new coming into this business is don't be afraid to fail. And we all started where they were at some point. And we got Dave on the line right now, and he started way back before they even called him BDRs. And look at him today. There is light at the end of the tunnel. We got to be able to take the risk and the jump.
Definitely. At the end of the day, everything that's good happens on the other side of fear, is what I always like to say. So you got to just dive in and just do it. And that's the only way you're going to get comfortable with it, right? So what I want to talk about now is, when it comes down to objection handling, of course, there's tons of frameworks out there, right? So Cameron, I would love to hear your perspective, because it's interesting on frameworks and how you've been trained in terms of objection handling.
Yeah, I would agree with what Sean says. Like, when you approach frameworks, I think it's really important to keep that in context. Like, they're frameworks for a reason. They're not a dedicated script always. They're not like a silver bullet. Like, they're not just going to work each and every time. I think frameworks are helpful in trying to understand like the steps to qualifying someone. And that's like really what they do for me. In my experience, like the Sandler sales method has been a very popular one that I've adopted throughout my career. And a lot of what that speaks to is like the 80-20 rule, of essentially what that means of you're talking 20% of the time and the customer / prospect is talking 80% of the time. So it's really just a great way to let them talk, hear what they have to say, and have thoughtful follow-up questions. So I think it's just important to keep top of mind that it's meant to be a framework, but at the end of the day, it's supposed to be conversational. So if it, let's say, goes off script or kind of goes outside the bounds of what you're preparing for, just to be prepared to pivot and let them speak and just hear them out and show curiosity. So I think that's what makes conversations and sales successful.
Definitely, Cam. And I totally agree with that. Frameworks are there to guide you, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to sound like Cam on the phone. I'm not going to sound like Colby on the phone. I'm not going to sound like Dave on the phone. So I've got to have my own voice. And the only way you're going to be successful is finding that voice and being yourself on the phone, right? So you've got to, yes, follow the guidelines and follow the frameworks, but also be a human being. I think that's what it comes to first and foremost, right? Not a robot, right? That's why AI is not selling to people right now. People want to buy from other people and they crave those relationships. So you got hired because of you. Just remember that. So always try to use your own voice and then use frameworks as a guideline. Dave, I'd love to hear from you. I know you have a particular way that you like to coach your reps and coach your team in terms of overcoming objections and really sussing out true deals.
Yeah. Look, guys, I've been trained in any type of sales best practices you can think of, right? I've been through Sandler and Bosworth, Siebel, and there's just been so much throughout my career. And here's the thing, I can boil it down to this. It's really hard at first, and that's why you got to practice and play. Role play with your peers, role play with your manager, and then be premeditated. So next time you get that objection that you didn't think that you did very well on, if you role play it and you learn 5 or 6 questions that you're going to ask, because you're going to want to ask a series of questions. And one of the best practices I like is from Challenger Sale. It's called the 3 T's: teach, tailor, take control. So I will ask a question to an objection, and then I'll stop and pause before I allow them to answer. And I'll preface by saying, the reason why I'm asking you is this and this. And it's usually telling a short customer story, what I've learned, what we've learned as a company, somebody in your role, somebody just like you that's done this with us, right? And what you're doing is you're leading the witness, almost like a lawyer does in the stand, right? You ever see court TV or some of the movies? It's the same thing, right? You need to be premeditated, and you never want to really ask a question that you don't know the answer to. You're guiding them through this process, and that's why you got to role play it. So yes, marketing and sales enablement can create the common objections that you're going to get and the questions you should ask, but it's not going to roll, and it's not going to be easy for you unless you practice it and be premeditated. It's like an athlete, right? If you want to be really good at anything, whether it's a golf swing or wrestling double leg takedowns, you got to do it thousands of times to build that muscle memory. I can go to any company in enterprise software B2B, don't even need to know the products, and I can handle any objection. Why? Because it's the same framework. It's the same thing. People buy technology to solve business problems. So the truth is, you need to figure out like where that question is coming from. Is it a business problem? How big the problem is? It's a tiny problem or a big problem? Is it not relevant? And it's somebody like maybe the competitor's champion trying to catch you and set a trap on you, right? Because they're not in your camp. You got to ask questions. And then you got to start to figure out, are your questions good? And are they responding to it? Are they giving you feedback? So the point being is role play with your manager. Don't be afraid to fail, because you're going to fail forward and you're going to get better each time.
Yeah, definitely, Dave. And I think that's a common theme that we're hearing coming up, right, around objection handling. Being genuinely curious, right, and asking questions. That's what it really comes down to, right? When someone gives you an objection, be genuinely curious why they're giving you that objection instead of trying to overcome it, right? Because in my opinion, the true purpose of objection handling is not to book the meeting or win the deal. It's to truly understand, right? Like what's really happening and what's behind that objection. So you shouldn't be trying to overcome it. Instead, try to understand it. And the best way to do that is by asking questions.
Yeah, 100%. I'm just to pile on that a little bit. Like, you guys have to be uncomfortable, and you should ask uncomfortable questions. And look, if you should be doing business with that company, they're the right ICP, they're the right persona, you've been trained. There's lots of companies and lots of people that have their title that use the technology that you're selling just like them. Your job is to connect the dots and make a connection. So ask those uncomfortable questions, dig down deep, and peel back those layers of that onion and figure it out.
Definitely, definitely. So this comes up to our next topic, and with regard to can you anticipate objections prior to hopping on a call? Maybe by doing research. So I'd love to get your take, Colby, on is it possible to really anticipate what that objection might be prior to hopping on that call?
Yeah, I think in our realm, yes, there are objections that you can anticipate for. So I'm going to give it a shout out to one of my reps, Keyshawn Brown. He's one of our message masters here at Mind Tickle. And he has this really good intro where he will go, if he notices, again, like we always are looking for businesses that are growing, but that doesn't mean that that's our only customer base. So if he notices a reduction or whatever's going on there, he'll intro with something like, hey, I've been speaking to a lot of leaders that are working in a reduction environment. And ultimately what they're trying to do right now is to get more with less. So he'll actually handle what he thinks is a perceived objection right in the intro, right? Get that hook in there. I also think that in the BDR realm, we're going to have a group of objections in the first 30 seconds that we could prep for, right? I'm too busy. I'm running into the meeting. Is this a sales call? And again, it goes back to mastery of those 10 objections that we're going to hear throughout our whole career. If we could really master those, we can get that extra 2 minutes. One thing I'd like to add too is also listen to your game day footage. We see athletes do this all the time. After a call, if your calls are recorded or your Zoom things are recorded, spend some time and watch that game day footage because you might learn something about yourself. You might learn something about how you're positioning something. A lot practice, again, practice, but also look at your outcomes, watch your outcomes, listen to your outcomes. You can improve a lot just by watching yourself.
Definitely. That's great advice. That's how I got better is also listening to my calls, but also listening to the best cold callers calls as well to see what can I be doing, maybe be doing differently and seeing if I'm actually doing that with my calls as well. So like cross checking to make sure that I'm hitting what they're hitting because they're seeing success. So I love the fact that you said tribal knowledge. I think that's so important on an SDR team. So use your peers. Use not use but like work with your peers, collaborate with your peers, and make sure that you're working with each other because 10 brains are better than one. And if you're all working together, you're going to come up with the best messaging. You're going to come up with the best way to overcome objections. And you guys are going to see more success that way. So that's my best advice too, is make sure you're working as a team rather than trying to work on an island. So Cam, I'd love to get your opinion on anticipating or assuming objections prior to running a discovery call. I think you have a different take on this a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of what Colby said in terms of anticipation. And like the way I think about it is that I think, yes, you can anticipate some objections that might be coming up, but I also think like that could be a slippery slope where you're like over prepared and just like oversharing what that might be. So, for example, before I make cold calls or check in with a customer or whatever it is, obviously being at Salesforce in a CRM space, we look pretty heavily at like past emails that might have been shared in the account or with that contact, past calls with some notes in there that says they reached out to this customer 4 different times. Every time they've said we don't have budget or we're not interested, whatever it is. So I think that's helpful to know. Okay, this has been their, let's call it like temperature over the past year each time I've reached out. So that's helpful to know about. However, like I wouldn't over prepare for that so that if they do share that no budget type concern, you just drive right into it instead of really trying to peel back. Oh, do you have a sense of like what you're paying already or like what Salesforce potentially costs? Just curious, like how you got to that conclusion. So a lot of the times I think people like prospects, customers might jump to conclusions just maybe based off the reputation of your company or whatever it might be. So I think, going back to how I talked about it earlier, that objections are like the starting point of like selling. What I really actually mean by that is that's the starting point of selling your relationship. So as you might know, a lot of these companies and businesses get dozens of cold calls a week. So those assumptions actually are a bit of a two-way street. Where they're assuming, oh, you're just another salesperson calling me. Why am I taking this call? Are you any different than the others? Versus if you actually lead with curiosity and show you're there to help and be in their team, you're actually selling that relationship. And I think that's the most valuable piece. Instead of selling your product or your company necessarily or whatever it is, you're really there to sell that one-on-one relationship you're trying to make with them.
Definitely. And I know my time at Salesforce, we always tried to position ourselves as trusted advisors or being consultative. At the end of the day, that's what our job is, not to sell someone technology. It's to help guide them throughout the process and be there to help direct them to make the most informed business decision for their business, right? So I love that, Cam. Dave, I'd love to get your opinion on prep prior to discovery and what you can find out prior to hopping on a call or a discovery call by doing your homework and your research and to anticipate some of those objections that might be coming up.
Absolutely. Look, every time I do deal reviews, whether it's early pipeline stuff, the stuff that just got qualified in, or it's even later stage, the rep has to be super on it around points of view on the account. What's going on in their market? What's going on in their world? What are the top objectives? What are their initiatives? How is your solution tied to the initiative? These are really important things that you need to be able to anchor on. The last thing you want to do is just try to sell in features and functions and hope that you get somebody to buy it, right? You have to be able to tie to a strategic initiative in the company to move the needle, especially if you're selling into tech right now, because there are economic headwinds, budgets are tight, companies aren't spending as much money. In fact, they're cutting vendors out, trying to consolidate. So it's really important that you have a point of view. The other thing is you've got all these great tools available to you. LinkedIn Navigator can help you identify who's connected to your organization. So we always look for, does our money know their money, right? Like our investors know their investors. Our board's connected, our executives connected. Triangulating and understanding that's really important. It takes over 12 people now in a consensus decision to buy technology. 12 different people have a vote. And any one of those that you're not talking to could veto it because they don't understand your value proposition. So research is so important. Sales intelligence is really important. And leveraging AI to help accelerate all that is so important. I think LeadIQ, and to just give you guys a plug, when we implemented, we had Zoom Info as our sales intelligence, and we just did a brute force trying to do research on the company, trying to understand our value drivers from our 12 different products and the 120 personas that we had to sell into. That's a lot for a salesperson to take on if you think about it. So we had to go into our sales enablement platform and remember all that. And then what we were able to do is really take the sales intelligence part of what LeadIQ gave, integrate that with LinkedIn Navigator, know who the personas that we want to go to. The engine would go out and do the research for you based on the parameters that you gave. So I want to know this about this and that about that. And then you also, product marketing spoon-fed all our value drivers by persona into the AI engine. And it automatically wrote a 30-second email that was on script. What's going on in the world today? Who's the customer story of success that we fed that's similar? Why they should take a meeting with us? And it increased our SQLs by 400% on outbound. And to make matters even better, I personally wanted to empathize and understand what the BDR team and the sales team was going through. So I personally tried to do the day in the life. So I tried to research a company. I tried to research our products. I tried to write an email. I gave myself a D- on the email I wrote. It took me an hour. So the velocity wasn't there. And it wasn't even a good email from my point of view. I got it wouldn't even get a look. So look, there's great tech out there that can help accelerate this LeadIQ. I'm a big fan of what they do because they can help with velocity, not just writing a better email on script and on point, but it can truly help free up more time. So if you are reducing an hour for a custom email down to minutes where you have to just do a few tweaks and edits, your velocity of sending out more emails is going to increase your chances of getting more opens, more meetings, and more SQLs because it's the numbers game, and you guys know that, right? And so, yeah, you got to invest in good sales intelligence that's integrated with the tools you already use, whether you're using Outreach or some other tool for automating your batch processing for doing these outbounds. It's so critical because Everyone's trying to get to the buyer, and you're spamming them with tons of messages, and they're not opening them because it's not relevant. So how do you differentiate yourself and be relevant? You got to speak their language. You got to have a point of view on their company, and you have to be able to talk about in a short customer story on why you're relevant.
Definitely, definitely. I think relevancy is by far the most important thing when it comes down to crafting messaging, right? Personalization is important, but you need to make sure it's relevant to their specific industry, to their specific person, and be as specific as possible with your messaging. So I love that perspective, Dave. So what I want to talk through right now is we're hearing a lot of like status quo. Everyone's going to stick with the status quo, right? So they have a competitor, they're not looking to change. So that was the number one objection that the attendees put into the poll at the beginning. So I'd love to get our panel's perspective on how you overcome we already have something in place and just status quo in general. I know, Dave, you have an opinion on this, but I want to start off with Colby. Colby, from your perspective, how do you overcome we already have something in place? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was in the question and answer. That's great news for us, actually. Because of the breadth of the platform of MindTickle, we compete in a lot of different spaces. Oftentimes, when we're connecting with somebody, they have a piece of the puzzle, but they don't have the whole puzzle, right? When we get something, we already have something in place. That's great news. I'm happy that you're taking enablement seriously. And then we're going to dive into like what challenge were they trying to solve when they brought that piece on? And how is that contributing to their bottom line? And can we fit in to that solution that they potentially have? That's what we try to do from a BDR standpoint. And you have to remember, we have 3 to 5 minutes with these folks. So it's not a 30-minute discovery call. It's not an hour. We have to do this in 3 to 5 minutes, which can be challenging. We try to acknowledge it, praise them, and then try to understand what they were trying to solve when they were bringing that on.
I love that. I love that. And then once again, we're seeing asking that question at the end instead of trying to overcome the objection for the meeting, we're trying to really dig in and figure out what's going on. Cameron, I'd love to get your take on this. I'm sure you run, not too much actually with Salesforce, but I'm sure you've ran into this a few times, maybe against HubSpot.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a competitive market, competitive landscape. If someone tells you like, hey, we're all set, we're good with our current solution, yeah, that is definitely a tougher objection. I think it also depends like the role and who you're talking to. So for example, like speaking to like an end user, whether it be like a manager or like a sales rep, whatever it is, it's always nice to know like their perspective on using the platform so that you can know if their experience is positive or negative versus if you're talking to like a VP of sales or like a C-suite type person, they might just be saying that to get you off the phone. I think it's obviously very important to do your due diligence on your competitors and the kind of current solution they're using. And there might be ways to potentially add on to that. So it's not necessarily always, hey, we're here to rip and replace. That's usually probably a tougher conversation to have. It's more about tell me about like any limitations you're currently having and just like what your overall goals are. And I think that how you can quantify ROI for someone can go a lot of different ways. So there's some departments or people in a company who care more about the ROI in terms of dollars. There's some who care more about the ROI in terms of like time savings. So I think that if you're able to position yourself as saying, hey, I know that you're paying this price, that's great. Have you considered using something like Salesforce, wherever it might be? Typically, we see people who switch from this to this have resulted in countless X number of hours of time saved. So I think when you're trying to figure out if you can be a better solution, don't just look at comparing the price points, who's cheaper, who's the better offer. It's also a lot more factors. A lot of times come down to the time savings and ease of use and so many more factors than just that.
Definitely, definitely. I think you have to impact is really important when you're overcoming objections. What is the impact of sticking with the solution that you have today? I think one of the main reasons why we're seeing this objection come up so often right now is it's a lot harder to buy technology. And when you buy technology, you put your neck on the line, right? So there's a little bit of fear in terms of putting themselves out there. We already have something in place right now, right? So why would I go and put my neck out there to change what we're doing? What are you going to do differently? Dave, I'd love to get your opinion on this objection because I know You said right now we're fighting. You never want your reps to lose against the status quo. You're okay with them losing against a competitor, but not status quo. So I'd love to hear how you overcome this.
Look, I spent a lot of time as a sales leader, like looking at lost deals. And actually, my VPs and I oftentimes will go back and talk to the prospect that we lost to learn. And it's not because we don't believe the salesperson, they maybe mismarked it. It's truly like the ones that I try to learn the most on are the status quo. Like, my philosophy is this: if they are a perfect ICP, we know you should be doing business with them, right? You've got a really strong value proposition that lines up. You've got lots of customers just like them in their market or space. Then you ran a crappy sales. That's just the brutal truth. And so I don't say that because I want to go and sit down with the sales rep and say, you're at a crappy sales cycle. I actually want to figure out like what was the miss and how do we coach and make you better so it doesn't happen. So we actually use it for enablement and learning. And so it's so important. There's really a couple of reasons in my experience why you lose deals. The first one is status quo. You just fail to connect the dots to the business outcomes, right? And the framework is quite simply, if they stay with what they're doing, what are the negative consequences in their own words, right? To that individual that you're talking to, their team, to their group, to their division, to the company. And maybe they can't answer all those questions, but again, you're asking questions to try to find out like, hey, if you live in this world that you're doing things with tools and manual processes and you stay there, do you lose customers? Do you churn revenue? Like you got to be able to find those metrics, those negative metrics, because that's going to allow you to be defensible and start to have better conversations. And by the way, when you do get in front of the economic buyer because your champion finally got you there, if you're not talking that language, they're not going to buy, right? They're just not going to buy. You have to be able to build a business case. And then once you've documented and qualified all of the kind of the day in the life and the negative consequences, they stay there with some metrics, then you got to think about what does the promised land look like, right? Describe the promised land, the future state. And of course, you're going to work with your champion to paint a vision and picture and how your capabilities gets them there. What are the positive business outcomes of that? The positive business outcomes, right? We're going to retain more customers. We're going to increase our revenue. Guys, some of us are selling technologies today that are not budgeted, right? It's like new category creator, not budgeted. That's called discretionary budget. You know where discretionary budget comes from? They have to figure out on the P&L where they're going to drop some other project or not hire a person from an operating expense and reallocate that budget to fund your solution. You're asking them to do a lot in order to do that. So you have to build a really strong business case. So the status quo, quite simply, if you lose to it, especially if it's like the perfect fit ICP, you just ran a poor sales cycle. The second competitor is competing priorities for the economic buyer. Now, that's out of your control, but then that's okay. But the economic buyer says, yes, we like this, but we're going to pick it up in Q1 next year because we're in the middle of a merger right now. It's from a priority and resources, it's a problem for us. Okay. At least you can go back to your sales leadership and say, hey, they're going to buy, they down selected to us. Not right. There's absolutely every bit of a chance of risk of losing it because time kills deals, but you didn't lose to the status quo, which is great. And then the third is finally the competitors that you deal with every single day in your space, right? And understanding why you lost, whether it was on features or price, really relevant. And you want to feed that to the management team so they can understand, like, are there gaps in your capabilities where your competitors are leapfrogging you? That's really good feedback for the product team. So it's so important that as a team, whether you're a BDR, a solution consultant, a salesperson, we need to have this data and this information. So logging it into your CRM, being honest about it, and asking for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help and say, man, I lost a lot of deals to status quo. I can't get this thing going. Where am I falling down? Look, they don't teach sales in college or high school, right? You have to learn it hands-on, and it's hard. You guys are paid a lot of money for a reason, right? Because you're professionals, and your job is to connect the dots for people to make better business decisions. It's take that latent need from the back of their brain and bring it forward so they want to buy. And it's hard, guys. It's really hard. So but that's why you're paid the big money.
Exactly. And I think the best way to think about it is putting yourself in your prospect's shoes and putting your prospects and your customers before your commissions. and really caring about their business. We keep talking about being genuinely curious. If you don't care, you're not going to be genuinely curious, right? So it's so important to show your buyer that you're working with them, not against them. We're working towards the same goal, and it's a seller's job to point the star to where we point the ship to where that deal should be headed. So very important. So I know we had a ton of other objections that come up, so I want to come through with a few of the other ones that were brought up. So Colby, I'd love to get your take on a no budget. I think that's something that's coming up right now, just naturally with macroeconomics. Dave just mentioned discretionary budget. So no budget, I think, is one of the, and timing are the two other ones that I want to dive into right now. So Colby, why don't you kick us off with no budget to start off with?
Yes. And again, we're coming from a BDR perspective. So we're talking about cold outreach, 5-10 minutes of talking to this person. We like to acknowledge, like, budgets are consistent moving targets, right? Ultimately, what we're trying to do is figure out if there's a potential technical fit and if we can achieve positive outcomes for you and your business. So we hit it head on. And most people we talk with don't have budget right now, but after a couple of discussions with a company like MindTickle or any enablement company, we can actually help save you money through tool consolidation or just by getting more out of your individual reps. And usually we will continue the conversation from there. Again, assume that they don't have budgets and just be prepared for that. Be prepared to get that answer and have a response for it.
And just remember, in a software sales cycle, typically we don't even price out till the third call, right? So they don't even know what it costs. So at the end of the day, no budget shouldn't even be a conversation because you have no idea. This could cost $1. This could cost nothing. Dave said yesterday, my solution costs $0. If everything else fits, like, then we can have the pricing conversation, right? So I think it's so important to realize when you get no budget, it's, you don't even know what it costs. Same with no interest, or right? It's, you've never seen the thing. How do you know? Like, how are you going to know? So just remember that usually they're not real objections. They're just trying to get you off the phone. So be logical with it. At the end of the day, they should be wanting to do their due diligence to see what else is out there and make the comparisons and make sure they have the best tools for their organization. And you have the best tool for their organization. So just remember, lean on your research as well. Stick to your point of view, reinforce that point of view if possible, and you should be able to overcome those objections pretty simply. Cameron, I'd love to get your opinion.
Yeah. One of the things I like Colby said was like how consolidating your tech stack could actually be a way of saving you money. So I think that whether you're selling software or kind of whatever industry you might be in, I think shifting that mindset of just because you're purchasing something doesn't have to be an expense. Like, it actually could be a way to bring money back in your organization. I see that James in the comments had a great comment about don't sell on budget. One of the great comments or / feedback I've heard is that price is what you pay, value is what you get. So really what you're trying to preach here is that you should try and get them away from just looking at price as a number and yes or no. It should be, before you even get to price, you have to get to value, and painting that picture just depends on what's important to them and figuring out like what value is most important to them and how you can actually save them money. So there's a couple of different ways to go about that, but it's really more about like understanding what their actual needs are.
Exactly, Cam. And I didn't know you're like Aristotle or something, having you on here, but very great quote. I love that. I think one of the quotes of the webinar so far. Dave, I'd love to get your opinion on this as well.
Yeah, look, I think I covered quite a bit of this. You're going to run into objections all the time, and you're going to want to really just establish that business case of value. If you don't have a point of view on the company, and what I mean by that, and I've said point of view a couple of times, what's going on in their world today? What are the market conditions? Is it helping or helping them? Is it geopolitical issues helping or hurting their business? Are their competitors leapfrogging? Did they just close a round of funding? There's all of this information And you guys are so lucky because this didn't exist in my world when I was doing your job. Like it was brute force getting on an airplane and going and walking the halls and talking to people to collect this data, right? And now it's just at your fingertips. And even better, it's at your fingertips with these powerful AI agents to go and assemble it all for you. Have a point of view, do your research. That's going to make you so much better because you're going to be able to handle objections. You're going to be able to address things like budget and I have no budget. I can give it to you free. CEO is saying X, Y, and Z needs to happen for you guys to be able to turn the corner, turn around the company, and we can help turn the company around with our technology. And here's why and how. Here's who we've done it with others. So really get good at research and get good at understanding your customer stories of success. What have been the value outcomes of your customers? Can you just recite those in snippets quickly? Because those are the things that are compelling, right? People want the gift of going second. They want to know who else is like them that's done this with you. And whether you're building pipeline or you're just handling an objection at different parts of the sales cycle, you have to be able to insert those stories.
100%. I think storytelling is by far the single most important skill a seller can have, right? Because you need to be able to paint the picture. And when you're explaining someone that's like them, they start to listen, right? And once you have their ear, they're going to start to understand. They're going to be like, oh, you work with them too? Okay, that makes sense. It won't make sense if you just tell them the value. So, Cameron, I saw you come off mute, so I think you have something that you want to bring up as well.
Yeah, Dave definitely inspired me with some good wisdom there. I just think back to some of the cold calls I've had, and honestly, the budget conversation is usually pretty common. And if they are asking you like, how much is this going to cost me? That's not a bad thing. Like if they say that a minute in your call, that's actually a sign that they're actually showing some interest to you. And you have to be prepared to not have to directly answer that on the spot. So like overcoming that objection in my experience has really been if they say, how much is this going to cost me? And I would say, look, I'd love to get to pricing with you. However, it really makes more sense to talk about what matters most to you. So it goes back to what Sean was saying about like the consultative approach, because you could have pricing on our website. They can just go and find it anytime they want to if they really care. But if you're talking to someone and you want to really figure out like how to demonstrate value to them, you have to get to know them better and say, look, we've got pricing on our website if you care to see that. However, in talking to you, usually people in your role have seen challenges for leads slipping through the cracks or whatever it might be. I'd love to know if that really matters to you and that we can talk about some pricing after that. So I think you have to use it as a segue to get into what matters to them and try and avoid pricing as early as possible, because they might just get some sticker shock or not fully understand the value of what you're talking to them about.
Hey, it's not the price you're going to pay. It's the value that you're going to get. You're asking me the wrong question. You should be asking me, what value will I get? Right? Me, my team, my company. That's the question they should be asking.
Exactly. It doesn't matter how much it costs if it's not going to do anything for them. Just remember that, guys. Like it doesn't matter how much it costs if it's not going to solve a problem. Yeah. So it really isn't a pricing conversation. But I think, Cam, I think your advice is great. I think it's great, but there are some times, right? Like the first time, try to overcome it and try to not give pricing. I think the second time, because you might get asked it again, right? I'm sure everyone on this call gets asked it again. Give a range. Price conditioning is what I like to call it, a range of what it's going to cost. And then lastly, you can go into the specifics of the license count if you want to, but usually if they're asking 3 times, like there's something you're missing there, right? Because they're already thinking about cost and they're not thinking about value, right? Just want to give the attendees another way to think about it, because I think you oftentimes get asked that question multiple times in a row, and sometimes you do need to give your prospect or your customer a little something, right? They don't keep asking that question over and over again. I want to pull up one more poll. I know we've got 7 minutes left. Typically, how many no's are you seeing how many no's are you getting before you get a yes? So how many no's are you taking? So I'd love to hear from Colby what your perspective is on this. How many no's how many no's is your team taking? And what is a good threshold do you like to set for them, if there is one?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, BDR realm here. So we're casting a wide net. I would say on a given day, if we're making 80 calls, let's just say we have a connection rate of 10%, maybe half of those are going to be no's, right? They're just going to be hang-ups, no's for some other reason. The other half of those, we're actually going to probably get past the intro and have some type of conversation. A lot of times you can avoid some of these pitfalls too, just by creating a really good lead list. We all do prospecting in some realm. You know how you feel when you do that prospecting list. You've had some where you're like, ooh, money. And then somewhere that face, exactly, Sean. All right, let's see where this goes. But also doing your research. I think a lot of people have said this. I read this. I have this little book that I always refer back to, the Little Red Book of Selling. And it's if you don't plan to win, you're going to lose to somebody who does. So what is your plan to win? Your plan to win is really to try to uncover your soft compelling events and your hard compelling events. So soft compelling events, hey, Dave wants to increase his sales team's revenue by X amount. Hard compelling event, his current vendor's contract is ending at the end of this year. So if you can marry both of those into and plus a well-constructed lead list, you're going to be reducing your no's by a lot more than if you're just throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah. And Colby, how many on a given cold call would you say that specifically, how many no's you're asking your reps to get before they hang up or before they say, okay, I'm done, this isn't going to go anywhere?
3 or 4 at least on a cold call, right? Before they absolutely hang up on you, right? And it's surprising. You handle 3 objections and all of a sudden somebody could open up, right? And we've seen that a lot. And then all of a sudden it's a 16-minute call booked in same week or early next week. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but also not every call is a booking. You got to remember that, right? Not every call you should be booking. Not every call is for booking. A lot of times you're just trying to figure out information or figure out who the right person is, especially if you're trying to break into an industry that you don't have a big presence in.
Exactly. And that comes down to just in general. The goal of a cold call is not to book the meeting. It's to learn to see if you can help their business, right? It's to learn and to understand. It's not to book the meeting. That's just a result. The goal of the cold call is to uncover information to see if we could be a fit for their team, right? So Cameron, how many no's would you say you take on cold calls and throughout your long career as an SDR and BDR?
Yeah, it's definitely pretty frequent. My first job after college, I was making 100 plus cold calls a day, and I would say maybe 90% of those were no's, but the ones that you got more out of them was very exciting. I think there's also different types of no's. There's no, not now, or there's no, not ever. So I think we're going back to like timing plays an important role. And also, like at the end of the day, as a lot of people probably heard, time is like really important to salespeople, like potentially your most valuable asset. It's important if they're telling you figure out why that is, so that way they're not stringing you along and you're booking an empty meeting that they don't care about. You're really trying to get an interest in them. Is this no because you don't have time today, or is it can we set up additional time to talk when it's a better time for you? Definitely, it's very common on a lot of the calls I make, especially cold calls. But I think what matters most is like what that no means, and if it's no, not now, or what you can do around that.
And then on a given cold call, how many no's would you take typically?
Oh goodness, yeah. I think 3 to 4, and then if it's not a good fit, then you might have to try the next call. But yeah, 3 to 4 at least, I would say.
Exactly. So that guys, it's human nature for folks to not want to be sold to. So your immediate reaction is going to be no. It's always been my reaction when someone cold calls me. I'm like, no, what are you trying to sell me? So just know that you're probably going to get a no, but they probably weren't even freaking listening to you in the first place. So were just trying to get you off the phone. So restate your value, restate your point of view, and try to go back into it. I tell my team to try to take at least 3 stabs before you give up. If you're taking 3 stabs, I know you're trying. I know you're trying to overcome objections. So try to take at least 3 stabs before giving up. So now, Dave, I'd love to hear your opinion throughout deal cycles. objections get thrown in, like wrenches get thrown into the deal. Objections come up throughout the entire deal cycle. Is your team ever overcoming those via email?
No, you're not.
Why not?
You want to get in the meeting, and again, you're paid to ask great questions. And 20% of the questions should be 80% listening. And so just do a really good job of asking those questions to qualify, like, what's the issue? And it could be like, you got to deal with the finish line and you're working on red lines and it's not getting over the finish line by the end of the quarter. And you've got to figure out, like, what's it going to take to get it done? You can't do that over email. People don't close deals on email. Okay. Order takers do, but not professional salespeople, which you guys are, obviously either striving to be or you are today if you're on this call.
100%. And then Colby, I'd love to get your opinion on like your team. Are they overcoming objections via email, or are you having them, once they get that objection via email, calling those folks right off the rip?
We want to call these folks right off the rip, right? We've messed around with trying to overcome objections via email. And I think Dave alluded to this without saying it. It can get messy pretty quickly and you could tarnish stuff. So it's really about just trying to understand and what's coming at us and then trying to talk to them like literally over the phone, right? We've handled a couple of them, but I'd say a grand majority of them, it's very difficult to handle an objection via email.
Yeah, I totally agree. Try to get those folks on the phone when you get an objection. It's so much easier. Tone gets misinterpreted. I'm sure you've read a text message from time to time and been like, wow, that person hates me. And you call them up and they're like totally relaxed. So I want to thank you all for joining. Colby, Cam, Dave, thank you so much for your time today. It was awesome having you. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Great pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.